The subject of my presentation is child abuse and the impact on which child abuse may have in allowing a child to grow productively into adulthood, as well as the long-term effect. Many people have a misconception of child abuse, thinking it only happens within certain demographics. Truth is, child abuse doesn't only happen in poor families or bad neighborhoods. It crosses all racial, economic, and cultural lines. Sometimes families who seem to have it all from the outside are hiding a deep secret behind closed doors. Child abuse is more than bruises and broken bones. There are four major types of child abuse: physical, sexual, emotional, and neglect. Physical abuse is what most people think of when they think of child abuse. That is because physical abuse might be the most visible. Research has shown that physical abuse in childhood may also be linked with abuse of addictive narcotics later in the development and early childhood. It is also noted that adults who suffer physical abuse in childhood are at an increased risk of aggressive and violent behavior. Sexual abuse of children is a serious problem, especially when it involves a family member. Incest is a betrayal of the relational ties within the family role. One study shows that one-third of the incest survivors has no serious psychological symptoms, while others are resilient in spite of having abuse-related symptoms. The remaining survivors of sexual and other abuse suffer significantly from after effects, including depression, substance misuse, disassociation, sexual and relationship problems, eating disorders, and re-victimization. Adults who were sexually abused as children have a greater chance of becoming violent, suicidal, and abusive to their own children than adults who were not abused. Emotional abuse is often dismissed or undetected because their wounds are not visible. But emotional abuse is an internal killer. Because emotional abuse is less visible, many sufferers go untreated, allowing its victims to carry the internal scars into their adult life. The fact is that emotional abuse is almost always present when another form of abuse is found. Emotional abuse also consists of verbal abuse. Emotional abuse can come from an adult as well as other children. Adults who have had few of their emotional needs met as children are often unable to respond to the needs of their own children and become emotional abusers themselves. Neglect is failure to provide for the child's basic needs. Neglect can also be a form of emotional abuse. No one escapes childhood abuse unharmed. Adults who experience sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, or neglect as children most often suffer from personality disorders and attachment issues. Being abused as a child can not only affect adults' mental health by causing depression, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, sexual disorders, suicidal behavior, and substance abuse, but can also affect one's physical health, such as chronic pain, gynecological problems, irritable bowel syndrome, diabetes, arthritis, headaches, cardiovascular disease, and chronic fatigue syndrome. The pain of being an abused child does not stop when adults. For some, it worsens. Overall, whether the abuse is physical, emotional, or sexual, it can be most detrimental to a person and the effect can last into middle age or for the rest of their life. It is not just women who have been victims of child abuse. According to the National Center for PTSD, at least 10% of men in our country have suffered from trauma as a result of sexual abuse. Men who experience sexual abuse suffer from depression and other emotional problems. But due to their difference in the gender roles, their emotional symptoms may look different than those of women. Child Abuse Prevention Act was not enacted until 1974, and it is the only federal legislation exclusively dedicated to preventing, assisting, identifying, and treating child abuse and neglect. In Ohio, child abuse is defended by several different codes. What constitute abuse victims of sexual activity, offense continually abuses or exhibits evidence of physical or mental injuries, conflicted others than the accidental means, or threats or harms to a child. Health, child's health and welfare. Mandatory reporting is required by attorneys, physicians, nurses, other healthcare professionals such as dentists and coroners, daycare workers, school teachers, social workers, professional counselors, speech pathologists, child service agency employees, and persons rendering spiritual treatment throughout prayer, psychologists, and day camp employees must all report child abuse. Reports should be made to the Public Children's Service Agency or to the municipal or county peace office in your county where the child lives. Penalties for failure to report or make a false report is a misdemeanor of the first degree. I interviewed several adults who had experienced some form of child abuse. Some have overcome, some have not. One lady I interviewed really stuck with me because of her age and also because of a conversation I had with her two daughters. It seemed that she has never gotten over her abuse and has allowed it to destroy any real joy she may have experienced in her life and that of her daughters. Her abuse was sexual and considered to be incest, which produced a child that she has never been able to love. She is a prime example of how abuse as a child can affect you in adulthood. She suffers from alcoholism, depression, low self-esteem, and numerous health problems. Not everyone who experienced abuse as a child will be traumatized, but some are deeply affected by past abuse. In order to have closure, you must find a way to process and digest the experience. I feel the best way to do that is through prayer and a good Christian counselor. To abuse a child is a terrible thing. The scars you put on their heart are so deep that it can take years to heal. I am living proof that one can be healed.